Welcome to the show. Today, I am going to describe a hypothesis I have about what's going on right now with these large, high tech, I guess you would call them companies. We used to call them computer companies a long time ago. The hypothesis generally is that they're reaching further and further, desperately trying to increase productivity through computers, because so far it's actually been a bit of a dismal failure where we're just giving more and more and more money to these companies and they are producing less and less and less for us. And a lot of people could easily disagree with that, but one example I would give is if software is so great and use of computers is so important in our work, why are most software companies hiding in private equity right now, terrified to come out to IPO? Why have so many companies failed to ever produce any meaningful income in comparison to their expenses, right? Now, obviously, there are some companies that succeeded very well. We're going to mention one of them as we go through this short history, and I'll try to find pictures of certain things in order to liven up the discussion here a little bit. So, I don't know a lot about using computers prior to around 1970. Why? Because I'm a Unix guy, so as you're using Unix, you stumble upon all these things that date really back to 1970 and 1971. But the main thing around that point in time, if you're talking about work and you're talking about using computers, DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation, was one of the most important companies on the face of the planet. And the concept generally was you would buy these DEC servers, right? Big machines, and you would connect to them via teletype. Now, a teletype would be something that looks kind of like a typewriter with a printout, right? That you're using to interface with the computer using a serial connection. Now, the important thing, if people don't know what a serial connection is, to differentiate it from a network, you had to have a serial port on the host that you were connecting to for each one of these serial teletypes that you wanted to connect. And so with DEC, you would have like a whole bunch of multiplexers and stuff like that. And in the early 70s, I believe, they were getting to the point where you could hook up more than 128 serial devices. Now, there was also, I think they referred to them as kind of glass teletypes at the time. It was a teletype that actually had a monitor, you could say, a screen, so that you could see what you were doing on the computer via that rather than it being printed. Okay? And so the model was, you have a server, it's managed by the professionals, and you have users who are using a serial connection to do whatever work it is that they have to do. It may be, formatting text. It could be scientific work. Who knows? And the Unix world grew up in that as well, because the PDP-11, I think, is the first. That's a DEC server. Was, I believe, the first one of the first servers that they had Unix at Bell Labs running on. Right? It was originally written in B, and then it was later written. They created the language C, which is a very good language for writing operating systems in. Right? I mean, that was the purpose of it. They rewrote it in C, and it was running on PDPs back in the day. And it became a very popular operating system for whatever reason. I mean, one is that the toolkit just grew and grew and grew, And so, a lot of people are interfacing with Unix in the early days via a serial connection, whether it be a type out or it be a screen, right? And it's all mostly text at that point in time, right? Although I know they were writing some video games. I think Ken Thompson was also writing video games, so I'm not sure about exactly how that factors into things. I don't have the knowledge on that. I never used a PDP-11. But for work, We're talking about everyone just logging into the giant server, okay? And the Unix world kind of changed a little bit from that. If you talk about like Sun Microsystems, right? Sun Microsystems, well, these are microprocessors they're working on that. So it's really separating it from stuff like the AS400 from IBM, like the mini computers and stuff like that. But they were still building powerful servers. And when Sun Microsystems was really becoming popular, networking existed, right? So rather than having to have one point to point serial connection between your workspace and the computer, you would have a network connection, and you would use things like Telnet to get into the Unix server to do your work. But once again, most work was done on a centralized server that was centrally managed. Okay, and for the workers sitting at their desk, they did not need a very powerful computer. And this extended right into graphics because, we had X11, which was the windowing system, had been devised, by the time Sun was becoming popular. And the way it was kind of designed in the same way of client servers, where you could have a very small, not very fast, not very powerful computer at your desk. And the graphical applications would run on a server, but would be displayed on your desk. So really all you had to have was the capability to do the display. Now, monitors were still very expensive back then, right? And the processors used on a lot of these were not exactly inexpensive anyway. But there was a small group of companies that were trying to make very, very inexpensive X terminals, is what they were called, right? So if you had a Sun server and you've got people that are working and they need a graphical interface for whatever application they're using, you could buy these inexpensive X terminals for a few $1,000, which in today's money is still quite a bit of money. But for that point in time, it's not a lot of cash. Now, something that started to happen, obviously, in the late 80s and the 90s is the concept of the PC, which was a hobbyist device mostly. And Microsoft comes along and they decide a few things that really build the company over the next several decades, right? Number one, they want their operating system to be really the only one that's running on these computers, these PCs. And secondly, everyone should have one of these PCs, right? Not only one in the home, but everyone at work should have one of these sitting on their desks. It's kind of a general purpose computer, right? These PCs. And so they went ahead and generally had a monopoly, let's be honest about it, that they worked very hard on because they signed a lot of deals, as far as I know, with manufacturers, the big manufacturers of PCs, where for a discount, they would install Windows on the machine, whether you wanted it or not. And let's face it, most people wanted it because they didn't know anything else. And most people were not hobbyists, so they wouldn't enjoy something like Linux, right? Well, Linux wasn't even around yet, but, the movement of, Linux was around before Windows 95. Right, Slackware Linux was available before Windows 95, so it's not exactly that it wasn't available at the time when Windows was becoming very popular, and Microsoft hated it. It was absolute hatred. But anyway, so what Microsoft ends up doing here is getting all companies across pretty much the world convinced that everyone sitting at their desk should have a fully powered PC with the latest CPUs, right? And that the applications should run on that PC. So a whole bunch of stuff happens because of this. number one, the ease of maintenance of having servers where you have admins that are running them disappears, because now you've got people at their desktop screwing things up all over the place, right? You've got higher expenses eventually, as you know, you're replacing these every 3 years, and you're always getting the newest and not the greatest CPUs, but the modern line of CPUs. I'll give you a perfect example right now of what Microsoft has done just recently. If you want to run Windows 11, you have to have a CPU that they support. Now, it's for security reasons and whatever, but they have to support it. So you're going to have to upgrade all of that hardware throughout your entire enterprise. If you're saying Windows 11 by this point in time, which most companies, I assume, have already upgraded, every single PC has to be updated. And you've got huge IT departments that are running all of this stuff and whatever. And so the concept of the productivity, how productive are people now they have these PCs, right? It took decades to prove that there was any productivity increase at all, and it's still kind of wishy-washy about how much more productive people are with these PCs sitting there. Now, there are some businesses, you can't run them without computers, so it makes absolute sense. If you wanted to be an ISP, well, you can't do that without having computers, right? So anyway, what ends up happening is that Unix is still out there, and Unix is super powerful, and Linux runs most of the huge websites on the back end of anything that you're using. It's all over the place. But Windows becomes the main entry point to everything, right? Just and later on, Mac OS claws its way back out and has some impact as well. And now we have phones and we have all of this other stuff. But generally, the client-server model, where you've got this small machine and then this larger machine where you're doing all your work on it, has kind of disappeared. Like it exists still for if you're using a website, you're using a web client and it's a web server and it's doing all this stuff for you. And AI is all server-based as well. You've got your little command prompt where you're prompting the AI, and then it goes off and it does a bunch of stuff, right? But I guess my main point is that in business, let me give you an example. My first job, I had a dumb terminal, essentially. I had a terminal hooked into the serial port of the computer, the main computer, right? And a keyboard hooked into that computer, and that's how I did my work. So I didn't even have a graphical user interface. But the thing was, there were zero distractions. I was simply in the work environment. I built my own ticketing system, and anytime anything came in, any email that came in and then went into the ticketing system, I would work on that, and there was always work to be done. So I was just constantly working. I was sitting at my desk working. And as time went on in my career, more and more, I used a Linux box for a lot of my career for all of my work, unless I was working in an environment where thankfully we had installed FreeBSD, and I was using FreeBSD then. And I wasn't even really using a graphical interface. I was just getting my work done. But I did notice, let's say somewhere around 2003, it became more and more and more impossible to stay away from a graphical interface for everything that I'm doing, because the company now has, let's say 10 major products that they use for productivity, right? They are all web-based, so the UIs are garbage. Every single interface is completely different. So context switching for me between all of them is slowing me down. And in meetings that we're having, we're 50% of the time not even talking about our own technology that we're working on. Instead, we're talking about these interfaces like a Jenkins or a Jira or whatever. And that's one thing that was going on. And then another thing that happens is that suddenly you're using cloud services, right? And so even more of the time now is we're discussing the cloud services themselves and trying to learn from each other all of, everything in the cloud service that we're using. And then the cloud service itself also has several different web interfaces. It may look like they're all contained in one thing if you're using it as a user, but generally, all of these different apps within there also has their own interface, and then it also has a text interface that you can use, which I always prefer. So you're context switching between all of this stuff. Now, as I was saying earlier, we never really got to the bottom of how much more productive people were with computers, and if it was worth the massive cost and time that we're spending. But I would say generally it was better. But there wasn't the correct type of focus on our job in computer science is to make things more productive. There were all these bells and whistles that most people didn't need for anything that they were doing. They were expenses for CPUs that are generally sitting idle, 60,000, 70,000, 100,000 CPUs in a company, 200,000 CPUs, right, for people to do their work. So there were ridiculous costs, and then all of the networking around all of that and having to have a gigabit connection for every one of these machines, right? So the costs grew and grew and grew. And I think most people know that when you were going to work over the past 10 years, more and more and more, all you're talking about is the computer systems instead of maybe what it is that your actual job is, right? Because I can't believe that everyone's job is to run a computer of some type. So I'm going to give another example. So back around 2005, I worked at a place where we created a new product. But let's look back at the history of making that product. I think about 4 or 5 people spent a year coding, and then 3 of us set up the monitoring, the design for how we had to do everything, especially anything that was missing that the developers hadn't done yet. So we have to do that. Migrations, some data integrity checks. That's a mixture of both developers and then operations going back and forth. Every meeting had an outcome back then. Okay, this is what we're going to do. Everyone agrees. We're done. Off everyone goes, gets their work done, and 99% of the time, it comes back. Everything works. Because we were only using, let's say 5 pieces of technology. Flash forward to 5 years ago, by that point in time, just to install software, I would say there would be 20 pieces of technology. And that could be libraries and scripts and different programming languages and a lot of dependencies all over the place. Then let's say we're using maybe 10 cloud services, right? And then let's say we're using those services in 2 different areas, of the cloud and all of that. And what ends up happening is you have way more people working on this. It's been splintered out, so you have to have specialists for each one of these things. It takes way longer to get something into production, right? And you have to be able, and it costs more, in my opinion. And you have to look at it and say, are we driving productivity? And my feeling on that is that we are not. Now, enter AI. And AI was entering at a time where I think a lot of these companies were looking at this and they're like, we have so many employees. This is so expensive, everything that we're doing. We're giving so much of our money to AWS, and you start questioning, are we truly more productive than we would have been before? Because now we've got so many dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of technology, and you have to have people that know the product, that they may not be even working all the time, but it's like you can't get rid of that person because they know the product. You can't get rid of this person because they have knowledge about the technology, maybe that someone else doesn't. And AI comes in, and the bright idea that they have, I think, is that we don't need the experts, right? because you can ask AI and it'll give you the answer, or a good enough answer, right? And so the concept that it's going to drive productivity, when I think development was grinding to a bit of a standstill. When you've got 100 people committing into one project and it takes forever to get something out the door, right? And you're just releasing little bits and pieces all the time. The concept that, people can use AI not just to ask the questions, but also to write the code, becomes a little bit of a dream for these companies. And they're trying to sell this to you. But I want to say, it's the same type of scammers who were selling to you that everyone needs to have a CPU on their desk. And hey, you have to upgrade every single CPU that you have because we're upgrading to this, and we don't care, you have to do it. It's the same companies that I think have, in many ways, been trying to sell something that's not true forever, now trying to sell that you will be more productive with AI. And it's funny to me how much they believe themselves when you listen to them, and they talk about AI as if it actually has intelligence, which is not the truth at all. And there used to be this race, but I think a lot of companies have given up on it, to get to that general intelligence. And it's not coming anytime soon. We're starting to notice now. So generally, it's about productivity. And my theory is that they've been lying about selling productivity for quite some time. Things have gotten, I would say, worse and worse and worse in computer science. Another example is that, it used to be that you could be a specialist in something and you could do your job, but that wasn't good enough for companies. You have to be busy all the time, which is going to burn you out, number one. But number two, you're going to be working on things that you're not very good at, and you're going to screw it up, right? And so, once again, they feel the solution to that is, well, if we give this person AI, it's going to be easier for them to work on Linux and work on Windows and work in Java and work in Python and work on all the stuff in AWS, on the command line, in the graphical user interface, and Azure, because some places are like, we need to be in 2 different clouds now. And if you see some of the job descriptions that come out for DevOps, it's ridiculous. And I know a lot of young people were like, yeah, I can do all of those 14 things. Yeah, you can for about 5 years until you burn out, right? And the company thinks we'll give them AI, then they won't burn out. No, they're going to burn out even more quickly, right? Because now it's just another layer of technology that now they have to fight with. Because AI is not going to be perfect, right? So my feeling is that it's actually, there's potential that AI is going to drive productivity into the toilet in a lot of places. In a lot of places, because they're going to make all the wrong decisions around AI, right? In a lot of other places, it's just going to hurt productivity as everyone tries to adjust. And as companies lay people off because they now have an excuse to lay off so many people, that's going to hurt productivity, right? Because suddenly the guy that did whatever that no one paid attention to is no longer there, right? And now you've got 2 people instead of 5 people working on some project, and they're just giving you AI to finish it. I've worked with some really good CEOs, but I would say most CEOs don't have any idea from a technological standpoint what the hell is going on. So there's no CEO out there that can say to you, we know that this is going to help you achieve this. They don't know. They're hoping that, because they would love to lay off as many people as possible. No matter how many years they've been saying we're all a family, if someone walks in and says you can get rid of every employee you have and your profits are going to go up, they will do it. And you're seeing this now. But I do not believe that the productivity is there. And I also think that a lot of productivity due to all of the interactions that you have on your PC, and then you open up Facebook and you get an email, and you've got, everyone is dealing with a ticket system now. You have a job where, no, you're not in support. Yes, everyone's in support now because you're getting tickets sent to your group, right? So everyone is also managing all these tickets coming in. I think productivity based on, comparing what we did in 2005, which was to generally launch a business in a year and a bit that was pretty stable, but it was missing some features, versus today, where people still haven't figured out, if you're starting, like, how do we even store our data, right? Because you have all these different options, right? And then we see news stories. There was one news story about a guy who was running Pocket something, where it seems like he didn't even hire a Unix person or a data strategy guy, and ended up losing all of the data because he had AI accessing all of the live databases, and it dropped a database, and that, because they didn't plan their backups properly, the backups also got deleted because no one read, no one had any concept of the different types of backups, right? It goes back to meetings I had way back with CEOs discussing backups, where they say, well, don't we already have a backup? And it's like, no, that's a mirror image. So if someone screws up the main one, the mirror is also going to get corrupted. But there is a reason to have that mirror image, but we also need a backup, right? Or a snapshot. So there's all these different things that these guys didn't care about. And a lot of people would say, oh, the AI screwed up, I'm still going to do business with these guys. No, they screwed up from the beginning because they didn't care. They didn't care about data integrity. They thought it's just automatically there when it's not. That definitely drives down productivity when you're making decisions like that. So that's my general feeling on it. We'll see how things unwind. I don't think we're getting general intelligence. I don't think that there is this panacea where AI is going to increase productivity in a way where computers never have in the past. These companies are there to sell you a line, to get you hooked. They want you laying off people. Then you're more dependent on their AI. But the question is it going to make you more profitable? Is it going to make your company more productive in general? Look at the expenses. Especially in the United States, where the United States does not have a good grid, where the United States does not have an abundance of electricity. If I could just go into Donald Trump here. Donald Trump gets into office, and anyone listening to him would have probably bought the biggest gas guzzler on the face of the planet, because electricity is never going to be used. EVs are going away. And then what does he do? He drives the price of gasoline through the roof, and diesel, which is going to affect everyone, right? And we have a country, the United States, on the one side, they're saying AI, 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 and on the other side, they're saying we're not investing in renewable energy. Well, that's a failing plan. So there's that to deal with as well, which means your AI is going to remain expensive for a long time, because you're going to have to use NVIDIA chips, right? Because even though they use a lot of electricity, they're fairly efficient in comparison to some of the alternatives. And you're going to be paying a lot for electricity, because the grid is garbage and the investment has not been made by the government in the United States, and they've cut that off. So all of that, to me, is headwinds for AI. I'd love to hear other people's opinions on it, and I can't predict the future, and this is just a hypothesis. So thanks for watching if you made it to this point, and have a good day.